The mountain village of San Aurelio rested quietly between two long valleys in northern Italy. From above it looked almost untouched by time. Narrow stone streets curved between houses with red clay roofs, and grapevines climbed wooden trellises beside gardens filled with rosemary and basil. Every morning began the same way. At exactly 6 o'clock, the bell of the small church rang across the valley. The sound rolled through the hills like a wave and slowly faded into the distance. Bakers opened their shops, letting the smell of warm bread drift into the square. Farmers started their tractors and drove toward the vineyards. Children hurried downhill toward the school, laughing and carrying notebooks beneath their arms. Nothing unusual ever happened in San Aurelio. At least, that was what the villagers believed. Among the people who lived there was a young teacher named Marco Bellini. Marco had grown up in the village and had never lived anywhere else. His classroom window overlooked the main square, and every afternoon he watched the same peaceful scene unfold outside. Old men talking beside the fountain, women carrying baskets of fruit from the market, bicycles leaning against the stone walls. Marco liked the quiet life. But in the spring of 2026, something happened that no one in San Aurelio would ever forget. It began early one morning. Marco had woken before sunrise and decided to walk along the hill path that rose behind the village. From the top of the hill, you could see the entire valley, the rooftops, the church tower, and the long rows of vineyards stretching toward the horizon. The air was cool and still. Mist hung low over the fields like a pale blanket. As Marco climbed the narrow path, he noticed something unusual. Someone was standing at the very top of the hill. At first he thought it might be a traveler who had lost the road during the night. Sometimes hikers wandered through the area on their way to the mountains. But as Marco came closer, he realized the figure was a woman. She stood perfectly still, looking down toward the village. Her clothing was simple but unusual. She wore a long white robe, and over her shoulders rested a soft blue cloak that moved gently in the morning breeze. Her hands were folded quietly in front of her. Marco slowed his steps. There was something about the woman that made the entire hill feel strangely peaceful. "Buongiorno," Marco said politely. The woman turned toward him. Her face was calm and kind, with an expression that felt both gentle and deeply familiar. "Good morning," she replied softly. Her voice carried a quiet warmth that made Marco feel as though the world had suddenly grown quieter around them. "Are you visiting the village?" he asked. The woman looked toward the rooftops below. "Yes," she said. "I came because someone asked for help." Marco frowned slightly. In a small village like San Aurelio, people asked for help every day. Someone needed help with their farm. Someone needed help repairing a roof. Someone needed help carrying supplies from the market. But the way she spoke made it sound like something different. "Who asked?" Marco asked. The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the church tower rising above the houses. Then she smiled gently. "You will see," she said. For a moment, the wind moved softly through the tall grass on the hill. Marco looked down the slope toward the village. When he turned back, the woman was gone. The hill was empty. No footsteps. No sound of someone walking away. Only the quiet wind moving across the grass. Marco stood there for a long moment, staring at the place where she had been. He told himself there had to be a simple explanation. Perhaps she had walked down another path. Perhaps he had simply lost sight of her in the mist. But deep inside, Marco felt something he could not explain. The same calm that had surrounded the woman when she spoke. He walked slowly back down the hill toward the village. Everything looked normal. The bakery was open. Farmers were loading crates of grapes into trucks. Children were running toward school. Yet only an hour later, the first sign that something extraordinary had happened began to spread through San Aurelio. A child in the village who had been very sick suddenly woke up. And according to his mother, a woman in a blue cloak had been standing beside his bed. The news spread through San Aurelio faster than the morning bell. It began in a small stone house near the edge of the village, where a young boy named Luca Ferraro had been ill for several days. His fever had grown so high that his parents had spent the entire night sitting beside his bed, placing cold cloths on his forehead and whispering prayers. The village doctor had already visited twice. "There is not much more I can do," he had said quietly before leaving that morning. "If the fever does not break soon, we will have to take him to the city hospital." Luca's mother, Isabella, had barely slept. When the sun finally rose above the hills, she sat beside the bed holding her son's hand. watching his chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Then something strange happened. The small wooden door of the house opened softly. At first, Isabella assumed it was her husband returning from the market, but when she turned toward the doorway, she saw someone else. A woman stood there. She wore a long white robe and a pale blue cloak that fell gently around her shoulders. Her expression was calm, peaceful. Isabella felt a sudden stillness settle in the room. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. The woman stepped closer to the bed. "I came because someone asked for help," she said softly. Isabella blinked in confusion. "We have asked everyone," she replied weakly. "Doctors, neighbors, anyone who might know what to do." The woman looked down at the child. Her eyes were filled with quiet compassion. "Do not be afraid," she said. She reached out and placed her hand gently on Luca's forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was completely silent. Then Luca's breathing changed. The tight tension in his face slowly relaxed. His small fingers moved slightly against the blanket. Isabella gasped. "Luca," she whispered. The boy's eyes slowly opened. "Mama," he murmured weakly. Tears rushed down Isabella's face. She turned quickly toward the woman, but the place beside the bed was empty. The woman had disappeared. There was no sound of footsteps, no door closing. She was simply gone. Within minutes, Isabella's husband ran into the square shouting the news. "Luca is awake." Neighbors gathered outside the house. The village doctor hurried back and examined the boy again. His fever had vanished completely. The doctor stood in silence for several seconds before shaking his head slowly. "I cannot explain this," he admitted. But Luca said something that made the entire room fall silent. "There was a lady here," he said quietly. His parents exchanged nervous glances. "What lady?" Isabella asked. "The one with the blue cloak," Luca replied. "She told me everything would be all right." By midday, nearly the entire village knew the story. Some people believed it immediately. Others were skeptical. "A fever can break suddenly," one farmer said in the square. "Children recover quickly," another added. But Marco Bellini listened quietly, because that morning, he had seen the same woman on the hill. As the sun began to set that evening, Marco climbed the hill again. The air was warm now, and the vineyards below glowed golden in the fading light. When he reached the top, he stopped. She was there again, standing near the edge of the hill, looking down toward the village. The same white robe, the same blue cloak moving softly in the wind. Marco approached slowly. "You helped the boy," he said. The woman turned toward him. "Yes," she replied gently. Marco hesitated. "Why?" The woman looked toward the rooftops below. "Because his mother asked," she said. Marco felt a chill pass through him. "People pray every day," he said quietly. "Why answer here?" The woman smiled softly. "Because their hearts called with faith." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The church bell rang in the distance. Marco looked at her carefully. There was something deeply familiar about her face, something he had seen before. Suddenly, he remembered. Inside the church, near the altar, the statue. His voice trembled. "Are you?" But before he could finish the question, the wind moved through the tall grass. Marco blinked, and the hill was empty once again. Yet now the mystery was only beginning, because the next miracle would happen inside the church itself. By the next morning, the story of the mysterious woman had spread beyond the houses of San Aurelio and into every corner of the village. People spoke about it in the bakery. They whispered about it beside the fountain. Farmers discussed it while loading crates of grapes into their trucks. Some believed the story immediately. Others were not so certain. "Children recover from fever all the time," the village doctor insisted. "We must not jump to conclusions." But one fact remained impossible to ignore. The boy who had nearly died the day before was now running through the square again, laughing with the other children. And he continued to say the same thing. "A lady in blue helped me." Marco Bellini could not stop thinking about the woman on the hill. That afternoon, he walked to the church of St. Gabriel, the small stone building that had stood at the center of the village for more than 300 years. Inside, the church was quiet. The thick stone walls kept the air cool even during the warm afternoons of spring. Sunlight passed through tall stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the floor. Marco walked slowly down the aisle. At the front of the church stood a familiar statue, the Virgin Mary. She wore a long white robe carved from pale stone. A blue cloak flowed across her shoulders. Her hands were opened gently, as if welcoming anyone who came seeking comfort. Marco stared at the statue. The face, the calm expression, The gentle eyes. It was the same woman he had seen on the hill. The same woman Luca had described. Marco felt a strange mixture of awe and uncertainty. He had grown up seeing that statue every Sunday. But now it looked different. Almost alive. Suddenly the church door opened behind him. A small group of villagers entered quietly. Among them was Isabella Ferraro, Luca's mother. She walked slowly toward the front of the church. Her son followed beside her. The boy stopped suddenly halfway down the aisle. His eyes widened. "That's her," he said softly. The villagers turned toward him. "Who?" one of them asked. "The lady who helped me," Luca replied. "She's right there." He pointed toward the statue. The room fell silent. Isabella looked at the statue, her eyes filling with tears. Father Antonio, the village priest, stepped forward from the side chapel. "What is happening here?" he asked gently. Marco turned toward him. "Father, the woman we have been talking about." He pointed toward the statue. "She looks exactly like this." Father Antonio studied the statue carefully. Then he looked at the villagers gathered inside the church. For a moment no one spoke. The quiet was so deep that the soft sound of wind moving through the trees outside could be heard through the open doors. Then something unusual happened. A beam of sunlight passed through the stained glass window above the altar. The light moved slowly across the church floor, and then it fell directly upon the statue. The blue cloak seemed to glow. For a brief moment, the face of the statue appeared warmer, almost alive. The villagers gasped quietly. Even Father Antonio stepped back in surprise. Then the light shifted again. Everything returned to normal. Just stone, just sunlight, just a statue standing quietly at the front of the church. But the feeling in the room had changed. Everyone sensed it. The same calm presence Marco had felt on the hill. The same peace Isabella had felt in her home. The same comfort Luca had described beside his bed. Father Antonio finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we have been visited." No one laughed. No one argued. Because deep in their hearts, the people of San Aurelio were beginning to understand something extraordinary. The woman who had walked among them might not have been a stranger at all. And the greatest miracle was still yet to come. That evening the village of San Aurelio felt different. People moved more quietly through the streets. Conversations were softer, almost respectful, as if everyone sensed that something extraordinary had touched their small community. The story of the mysterious woman had now reached every home. Some villagers still searched for logical explanations. Others had already begun to believe. But nearly everyone walked to the church of St. Gabriel before nightfall. Candles were lit along the stone walls. Their warm glow flickered gently against the ancient arches of the church. Families knelt together in prayer. Some prayed for healing. Some prayed in gratitude. And some simply prayed for understanding. Marco Bellini stood near the back of the church, watching the quiet crowd. He could not forget the woman's calm voice on the hill. "I came because someone asked for help." As the last light of sunset faded beyond the stained glass windows, Father Antonio stepped forward. "My friends," the priest said softly, "sometimes we search for miracles in great and powerful events. But often, God sends help in ways that are quiet and easy to overlook." His words echoed gently through the church. At that moment, a young girl near the door suddenly pointed outside. "Look," she whispered. Several people turned toward the entrance. Through the open doors of the church, they could see the hill above the village. A figure stood there. A woman. The fading sunlight touched the fabric of a blue cloak moving softly in the wind. Gasps filled the church. Marco stepped outside slowly. Other villagers followed behind him. No one spoke. They simply watched. The woman stood calmly at the top of the hill, looking down toward the village. For a moment, the entire valley seemed perfectly still. The evening wind moved gently through the vineyards. The church bell rang once in the distance. Then the woman lifted her hand in a small, peaceful gesture of blessing. Marco felt the same calm that had surrounded him the first morning he saw her. It was not a feeling of shock. It was peace, deep and quiet, the kind of peace that settles in the heart when fear disappears. Then, as the last light of the sun slipped behind the hills, the figure slowly faded into the evening mist. The hill stood empty again, but this time no one doubted what they had seen. The people of San Aurelio returned to the church in silence. Inside, the statue of the Virgin Mary stood exactly as it had always stood. White robe, blue cloak, gentle expression, but now it meant something more. From that day forward, The villagers often spoke about the evening when heaven had visited their small town. Not with thunder, not with great signs in the sky, but quietly, like a mother answering the prayers of her children. And sometimes, when the wind moved softly across the hill at sunset, people said they could still feel that same calm presence watching over the village. A reminder that faith does not always bring loud miracles. Sometimes it simply brings hope. And sometimes, a mother comes when her children call.